Okay, I'd like to call to order the City Council workshop. Today is Tuesday, February 10th, 2026. The time is 5:30 p.m. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silent meditation. Allegiance to the flag of the United States. Okay, the first item on the agenda, or actually item number two is, item number three is roll call.
Mayor Scott Nickel.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Adam Dyer.
Here.
Councilmember Neil Yorio.
Here.
Councilmember David Nutt.
Here.
Councilmember Susan Romey.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, item number five, we'll skip excusal of the council members since we're all here. Item number five is additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda, if any. Does anyone on council have any changes or additions? Hearing none, we'll move on to public comments. We'll go ahead and hear from John. Is it okay if we do since we have somebody presenting, we'll go ahead and do the presentation and then do public comment. I think that's probably a better order to this. So, going to item number 7, which is new business. That's discussion of future muck removal project. We have someone here from Brevard County, I believe, to make a presentation. So you come up and introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
Hello. My name is Abby Gehring. I'm an environmental specialist with Brevard County Save Our Indian River Lagoon program, and I'm here with Jean Allen. She is the engineer on our team. So I'm excited to give an update about the long-awaiting Indian Harbor Beach muck removal project. But before I get into it, I want to highlight some of the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program and the work that we're doing there, because this is one of the funding agencies for this project. So the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program is funded by the half-cent sales tax that was voted for and passed along every precinct in 2016. This was a result of a series of harmful algae blooms that plagued the lagoon. It happened in 2010, 2011, 2015, 2016, and so on. So it was very obvious that the lagoon desperately needed our help, and the wonderful citizens of Brevard County voted to approve this sales tax program. So over 10 years, the program is estimated to generate about $550 million in revenue, all of this being allocated towards different restoration projects which reduce and remove pollution to help our Indian River Lagoon. One thing that is really nice about having these funding agencies is that we can leverage these tax dollars. So a lot of this, it's a sales tax, so it's not just residents living here, it's the people that visit, and about 20% of that revenue is from tourism, which is really exciting. And we can leverage these dollars and get more funding from state agencies like FDEP or other grant agencies. And so for an average of $4 spent by the residents, we're able to leverage that for another $8. So that's really nice. While the main focus of today's talk is muck, I do want to highlight all the wonderful work being done by our program that'll help kind of slow the accumulation of future muck. And so there's a lot that we do, from wastewater treatment facility upgrades to septic to sewer conversions to stormwater projects, leaky lateral repairs. These are also, we can stop the nitrogen and phosphorus pollution before it enters the lagoon. Then we're working on removing what's built up over decades. That's the muck, that's our legacy load. And then we're working on bringing back ecosystem resilience through oyster projects, seagrass projects, clam restoration projects. So we've got a whole lot going on aside from just muck, but today's focus is going to be just that. I'm sure many of you in the room have either seen muck or likely smelled it. That's definitely a possibility. I did not bring any here today, but I'm sure you could go find some. Yeah. And so we define it as being a fine grain organic rich sediment, and so scientifically it's usually comprised of greater than 10% organic matter, and it's about 90% water by weight. So this just means it's very fluid. It can move around easily. Florida Tech estimates that there's 6,000 acres of muck in Brevard County alone. There's a lot out there to be managed and dealt with. And this is a problem because Indian River Lagoon muck, like I mentioned, it's very fluid. So something as simple like a dolphin going by or a manatee going by can stir up the sediment and clouds the water, and it blocks the light from reaching the seagrasses. It consumes oxygen, which might sound a little strange, but like I mentioned, there's a lot of organic matter. So you constantly have these bacteria down there working to break down this organic matter, and in that process, they're consuming oxygen. So they're pulling that oxygen from the water column that fish need to breathe. We call this a sediment oxygen demand. It's also just generally characterized by the death of biota. Not much can survive and grow in the muck. We've had a lot of biologists at Florida Tech look into this and confirm this. And we call it our internal nutrient loading. And so it's continuously releasing large quantities of dissolved nitrogen and phosphorus into the water column, which can fuel these harmful algae blooms. It produces toxic hydrogen sulfide, which is why not many things can live in there. And it's very fluid again, so it tends to favor these deeper, low energy areas like canals. It also tends to favor, like historically when you're building up the causeways, these pits were dug in the lagoon, so there's deeper areas in the lagoon, and these pits are filling up with muck. And what we're saying now is that the trash can is full. So you have these sumps within the water collecting muck, but now we're starting to see them reach the top, and it's starting to pour and ooze over into our healthy sandy habitats, which we really want to protect. So now that we know why muck is bad, what are some of the improvements that we're seeing with our muck removal projects? So dredging reduces internal nutrient loading. For this project specifically, the Indian Harbor Beach area, I've calculated that after removing all the muck, it'll prevent about 11,000 pounds of nitrogen per year from entering the lagoon. And so it also will help restore that oxygen and improve overall water clarity. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is water entering the dredge material management area. This is the water leaving the dredge material management area. Just visually, you can see the difference here. We can't just base it on visuals. We got to go and dig in through the data and to really pinpoint the benefits that we're seeing. And so as part of the harmful algae bloom research that the county does, we had applied ecology look into aerial imagery and look at a bloom severity index. And it kind of sounds intimidating, but really it's just a simple number that we can use to show how intense and widespread a harmful algae bloom is in a specific area. So in even simpler terms, high numbers equals worse blooms. We had them look at our the Ogallie River area. This area has been previously dredged in the past, and applied ecology looked at the bloom intensity before dredging and after dredging. And what's really interesting is the time that they were evaluating this, there were ongoing harmful algae blooms, but there were periods where there was no rainfall, so you're not having that external source of nutrients. This was a sign that those blooms are being fueled internally by the muck. Before dredging, the average bloom severity index was about, on average, 101, and after dredging, the average decreased to 26. And so in 2020, this is after dredging had occurred, the rest of the lagoon was seeing blooms, and in this specific project area was about 57% lower in bloom severity than the surrounding areas. And so we're seeing these lasting benefits even well after dredging is complete. And overall, there was a 74% decrease in the bloom severity index after dredging. So I mentioned with those pictures that we can visibly see the improvement in water clarity, but how can we really determine that it's getting better? And one of those metrics we can use is turbidity. Luckily for us, the St. Johns River Water Management District maintains several continuous water quality monitoring stations throughout the lagoon, so we can leverage the data from these and look at the different constituents like turbidity before dredging, during dredging, and after dredging to track the benefits. So looking at Turkey Creek, before dredging, the average turbidity was about 4.1 NTUs, and after dredging, it decreased to about 2.9 NTUs. And turbidity, for those of you that don't know, that's kind of just how stirred up, how darkened can you see through the water? Is it really mucky? Is it really turbid? Is it really disturbed? Are there a lot of particles? Before dredging, looking in that same Ogallie River project area, the average turbidity was about 6.4, and it decreased to 3.8. At first glance, these numbers don't seem astronomical, but what's really impressive and really hopeful for this is that these data, these after data, that's 6 and 5 years after dredging occurred. And so that's 6 and 5 years later that we're still seeing these benefits in the lagoon. It's not a one-time improvement, one and done. These are long-lasting impacts that we're having. And something that's not highlighted as often as, nutrient reduction benefits and improvements in dissolved oxygen is the trash that gets removed along the way. The following pictures are ones that we received from our contractors that were working in the northern Grand Canal area. That project just wrapped up. So these are just a handful of the pictures I received every day of trash that was stuck in the cutter head of the dredge. They had to stop production, get it all out, remove it, start it back up, and just fill up trash cans and trash cans full of it. So this is another great added benefit to the project. And the moment everyone has been waiting for, an update on the Indian Harbor Beach project. And so a little bit into the project details. So the satellite beach limits, it's about 34 acres with 12 finger canals. And here in Indian Harbor Beach, it's about 33 acres with 10 finger canals. That's the current dredge template. It might seem like we've made no progress, that no work has been done, but there's been a lot going on behind the scenes that isn't really seen to everyone except us and the engineers that are working really hard on this project. Some of that work includes years of data collection, permitting, conceptual and permitting design. So there's all these little intricacies that have to go into the project before it can begin, and so I'm going to touch on some of those. Our engineers, they had to, for permitting, there's a lot of different steps. There's a lot of check boxes you have to cross, one of those being hydrographic surveys. And so the surveyor that the engineers went with is Morgan and Eklund. They used a multi-beam survey to identify the top of the muck, and then you can go out and in 100-foot intervals probe it. So you're just taking a big pole through the muck, measuring the top, pushing it all the way down, measuring the bottom, and that can give you a rough estimate on the thickness. For Indian Harbor Beach, through these efforts, they found that the average muck thickness is about 5 to 6 feet, but there are some, pits that were dug out probably for development, where we're seeing up to 15 feet of muck in those pits. The current estimated volume is roughly 220,000 cubic yards of muck. And for Satellite Beach, it's kind of similar. We're seeing an average of 5 feet of muck thickness with some pockets up to 9 feet. The current estimated volume is about 297,000 cubic yards. The engineers also had to work hard on doing the environmental surveys, and so they looked at seagrasses, and you do this through focusing on areas with historic seagrass, so where seagrass has grown in the past, but also looking at areas that have the potential to be healthy seagrass areas. They reviewed aerial imagery, bathymetric data, and historic seagrass databases. The conclusion was there's no seagrass in this area. That's not really shocking. Seagrass doesn't usually grow in canals. But like I mentioned, we want to prevent that trash can from overspilling into healthy nearby adjacent areas that could potentially foster seagrass growth. They also looked at mangroves through field-verified aerial interpretations. For Indian Harbor Beach, pretty much all of the mangroves were outside the dredge template except for some drip line areas in the southern canals. And in Satellite Beach, all of mangroves were identified with the mangrove-associated buttonwood species, which are really important. And so throughout the process, there's special conditions in the permits that the contractors have to keep up with and follow those procedures to make sure that there's no impacts to these seagrasses and mangroves. There's also a lot of geotechnical work. The engineers collected samples from about 9 locations in Indian Harbor Beach and about 10 sample locations in Satellite Beach, and you're analyzing these samples for the physical properties, like confirming this is muck by definition, overlying hard sand, and also looking at chemical properties, so highlighting and testing the muck for all the things that's necessary for the permitting process. All the material is going to be handled and disposed of per the permit conditions. That's what the contractors adhere to, and the city as well. And so all of that being said, this was everything that had to get done to lead us to where we are today, and the engineers have successfully acquired the 2 main permits, one from the Army Corps of Engineers and the other from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The payable volume in these permits is about 325,000 cubic yards for Indian Harbor Beach and about 299,000 cubic yards for Satellite Beach. And these are higher than the estimated volumes, so that gives some wiggle room because over time things might change a little bit in terms of muck accumulation. The approved method so far is hydraulic dredging, and so that is the same method that was just done in the northern Grand Canal, and so that's where you had the pipeline going through there. The contractors, it's basically like a nice big vacuum that goes along the bottom, and it neatly sucks up the muck, and the water, we call it a slurry. The slurry then gets pumped through the pipeline all the way to the dewatering facility. In this case, it's possible that the dewatering facility will be the Florida Inland Navigation District BV52 site located in Palm Bay, right on Robert J. Collin US 1. So it'll be piped all the way down to that facility. Mechanical dredging was not included in the original Army Corps permit, but if this is the direction we go, that would require a permit modification. And the contractor and city are going to have to follow the general and special conditions within the permits. That's a given. So what are our next steps to get us to where we want to be? Like I mentioned a couple times, with project changes, you might have to do some permit modifications. You might have to update the dewatering disposal sites. The city also has to select an engineer, and that engineer has to finalize the issue for construction drawings with technical specifications. We have to coordinate with the Florida Inland Navigation District on using that BV52 dewatering facility. This would require a lease modification. The engineers also have to complete pre-construction permit requirements, so updating those seagrass surveys. And then they have to develop a bid package. That bid package goes through an internal review. Then the bid gets advertised for a certain amount of days. If we receive bids from numerous contractors, those bids go under a review process, and then the contractor can then be selected. So it's a series of steps leading up to that selection process. It's a competitive bid process. And then one option I'm going to discuss is piggybacking on our county O'Galley muck removal project. However, even if we do that, we still have to follow steps 1 through 5 and get that work done. So what would piggybacking entail? This could benefit the project because we could reduce mobilization and setup costs. It is a distance down to Palm Bay, so it would be nice if the contractor that's already mobilized at the O'Galley Causeway could just add a little bit of pipeline to get it up through these canals. It can improve efficiency with the larger project volume. That's just how it works in the dredging world. Increased volumes, increased efficiency. This could help speed up the project start time, but this is pending available funding, which we'll get into. And then there are some things to consider with this piggybacking option that could increase the cost. So longer pumping distance, about for every mile of pipe they require, it's called a booster pump. It just helps get the muck further down the pipe, and this is required for about every mile of pipe. So you will probably see them coming up on our O'Galley project. It is quite difficult to work in canal access. I was looking at Google Maps. These canals can be very narrow, and there's a lot of boats, a lot of docks, and so that just takes more time for the contractors to be safe and working in these environments. It takes coordinating with the community. If a boat is in the dredge template, there's certain offsets from docks we have to maintain, so a little bit more goes into that. As more time progresses, we fight the battle of potential rising labor and material costs. And then, as there is with all construction projects, any future scheduling delays, so equipment malfunction, hurricanes, any of those things could lead to. Timing is going to be really critical for optimal cost savings. We are moving forward pretty rapidly on our O'Galley project, and they could be done dredging with that project by the end of this year, maybe a little sooner than that. And so timing is critical. And contractor input is also critical, so communicating with the contractor, because this is going to impact the means and methods, which will ultimately affect the overall cost. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Jean, and she's going to talk about the fun stuff, the estimated costs and the current funding available. Thank you.
Yes, I get to do the fun stuff here. So I just want to back up a little bit and tell you why Satellite Beach and Indian Harbor Beach are together on all this is because way back when we got this really big grant, it was just more cost effective to do all of those areas at the same time with the engineering and the permitting So that's why you kind of see it all lumped together. But we did ask the contractor that is doing the O'Galley project to consider costs for a piggyback option. And so on this estimated cost sheet, what you'll see is that the green lines are the combined Satellite Beach, Indian Harbor Beach cubic yards for the total area, and then you'll see for the finger canals only, and then for Grand Canal only. And you can also see the cubic yards, how much that is, and then the total amount. So like if we did everything in Indian Harbor Beach and Satellite Beach, in Grand Canal and the finger canals, he's estimating $40 million. So then the blue lines are just Satellite Beach, and the orange lines are just Indian Harbor Beach. So again, on the top, it would be the total volume that's in Satellite Beach and Indian Harbor Beach that you saw in Abby's numbers. And for Satellite Beach, if they did the total volume of 297,000, you're looking at 22.7 million. And Indian Harbor's total is 219 at 17.468 million. So if you divided it out and you just did the finger canals, or you just did the Grand Canal, because we're going to get to the funds here in a second, you can see those numbers come down. Like for Satellite Beach, you're looking at 6.3 million to do finger canals. Indian Harbor Beach is looking at 5.8 million. And then for the Grand Canal area, you've got 16.36 for Satellite, 16.36 million for Satellite Beach, and 11.6 for Indian Harbor Beach. But the caveat on separating it out like that is that the Sorrel funds are based on the total area, which is the top 3 lines. So if we were to try to divide out the finger canals and the Grand Canals, we'd have to go back in and redo flux evaluation, because flux is based on area, and that's how we calculate your funding, which you're going to see on the next line under current funds. For Satellite Beach, Sorrel is offering 7.1 million, and Indian Harbor Beach has got 12.9. Then you have your FDEP funds, and you come over and you can see Satellite has about 7.6 million, and Indian Harbor Beach has about 13.68. So there's a total amount combined of $21.3 million. So these costs that Gator, dredging contractor, who's going to be our contractor for O'Galley, gave us are based on the fact that Indian Harbor Beach and Satellite Beach does this together. If you did it separate, your mobilization and some of those upfront costs are going to be more. I'm going to read some of these notes down here. So that was one, that be awarded simultaneously, and that it would immediately follow O'Galley because it needs to connect into the pipeline that we're going to have there already at the causeway. It assumes FIND, which is that BV52 that Abby was talking about, is going to give us time extension and approval for cities to use BV52. They're reluctant to commit to a really long extension time because they need to use the BV52 for the Interwater Coastway dredging maintenance to keep it deep. But I don't think a few years would be a problem. I just think like many years would be a problem with them. So the work would have to be done between 2026 and 2030. That's something that Gator dredging was saying. Then again, I've already mentioned that the Sorrel funding is based on doing the whole area, so we would have to go out and reevaluate if we can reduce the areas to get into affordable chunks. And then because these Sorrel funds are based on 2026 project plan updates, y'all may have to amend the contracts because I think they're based on older numbers. But then some other points I just want to talk about. There's some funding options. Cities could apply for legislative appropriations and water quality grants through FDEP. I think the timing on that is May or June when you apply, and then you could be awarded the money available by November, but it seems to be different every year. And some of the timing, Gator anticipates to be done with our O'Galley dredging project by September or October this year. So if you're gonna piggyback contract, a contract would need to be signed by September or October so that Gator can leave that pipeline from O'Galley Boulevard to Palm Bay in place. Otherwise, they're gonna be removing it and sending it to a different project. And depending on the weather and trucking availability, it should take 30 to 120 days to empty the BV52 dewatering facility of all of O'Galley's muck. And while this is going on, if there's a contract signed, they can be connecting pipes to the cities and adding the booster pumps that Abby talked about. And then they anticipate they could be firing up the dredge for the cities by early 2027 if all goes smoothly. Some of the limiting components is the current contract. Okay, so when you dewater the muck and it dries, you got to dispose of it somewhere, right? So St. John's was gracious enough to let us use their Micco disposal site down in Micco for our O'Galley project. And so when we were doing it, we're like, well, what about the cities? If they get a chance to join in on this, can they put some in there too? And so we were able to get a contract with St. John's that would allow O'Galley and the cities to have capacity at that DMCA in Micco. If our O'Galley project uses about 140,000 cubic yards, there's about 360,000 cubic yards left for the cities. But if I do the costs based on these costs that Gator gave us, that would mean that volume for 360,000 cubic yards would be about 28.5 million. So overall, you know, you only got the 21.3. That'd be about 8 million short. You got to have some for engineering. So it's about 8 million short. But find, again, I mentioned this before, may not be willing to let us use the DMMA dewatering facility for 360,000 cubic yards because that means it only has a certain capacity, then it has to dry, and then they have to, you know, remove it, then it has to fill up, dry, remove it. And the 360,000 might take longer than they're willing to give us if it extended out to 2031 or something like that. They might say no. So looking at the budget here again, the 21.3, if you remove some for engineering and say you got about 20 million left for the actual dredging, that would get about 250,000 cubic yards, and the cities would have to figure out how to divvy that up. That would reduce the time needed at BV52. Gator thinks that they could probably turn that over, flip it over one time to shorten our extension for the fine BV52. And I guess that's all I have to say about that, other than the first step is really to get out there and reevaluate the flux so that we can try to reduce your areas so that you can actually get started on something, because there is some money to get started on something, but we need to get the areas down. And then in the meantime, you can be applying for more money. So, any questions for us? I know that was a lot of information.
So I think what we can do is we can have an initial questions from council, and then we'll have the public, anybody from the public wants to speak and ask questions, then we'll bring it back to the council. So. So you may want to come back up, Gene. You may want to come back up. Sorry, thinking there's a few questions. So you mentioned that Gator construction, dredging, they're going to be wrapping up in September, October. They need a signed contract prior to that date, I would imagine. And then, of course, we're staring at a shortfall, a significant shortfall funding to do the entire project.
Exactly.
I want to be very careful as a city that we don't put ourselves in the hot water and get ourselves under contract for a lot of money and then find out we can't get the funds. There's zero guarantee of that happening these days, especially. As we all know, the state is
definitely getting more competitive.
Everything's under a microscope right now in terms of spending, and the last thing I want us to do is get in a bad position, either us or Satellite Beach for that matter. So that's where I'm kind of getting stuck on this a bit. You know, I see the option for potentially just doing the finger canals. And, you know, the appeal there, I think, is that we have the funding based on these current estimates. We have the funding, I understand, pending Sorrel reviewing the reduced scope of the project, and that will change their funding amount. It will lower it.
Or it could be the same if the flux comes back higher. It
Okay.
hasn't been studied in a
Okay,
while.
so there's
Yeah.
another question mark there.
Yes.
But as much as I would like to do the entire project, I can't help it that funding shortfall is not just a little bit of money. It's
Yes.
nothing that we could absorb as a city. No possible way we could do that. So that's, you know, in general, that's in my head. That's where I'm thinking that, you know, we could potentially tackle that as a phase one, if you will. And while that's being done, because it's going to take a long time to do the dredge operation. While that's being done, we can be searching for financing and funding, or not financing, but funding for the balance of the overall project. And again, we would essentially do another same type of scenario where we would sign another contract with them once we got the funding in place to be able to do the entire project ultimately. But that's a way to get our foot in the door and be able to piggyback on that contract. I think that does have a significant amount of value. But again, like you said, there's no guarantees that
Yeah.
that
Just
mine
want to
is
throw
gonna
one
do it.
other thing out too. Although the funding is harder to get for dredging, when you're under construction, it's sometimes helps to get funding. It's if you know you don't have a project going already. We've noticed that they don't give it to us, but if they're kind of going, sometimes they do. Especially if you have a good lobbyist.
Okay. And you mentioned there were no seagrasses within the project area. I
Right.
presume that's because they're basically canals,
Right.
and that's not a super suitable environment for seagrasses, correct?
Right. And the muck.
Right. And can you explain the payable versus the estimated?
Payable
Is it-
means that's what would be. Assuming you had the money for all that money for all that, that's permitted, so we could actually pay that.
Okay.
If you dredged any more than that, it wouldn't be payable.
Okay, I understand.
But those are way over these estimates.
Okay, so that just gives you that buffer in case you do
Yeah.
end up having. Okay, just wanted to clarify that a little bit. I think that's all the comments that I have, so we'll move along to Deputy Mayor Adam Dyer.
Yes, like the mayor said, there's a lot of variables in this equation. Was the capacity estimates for the new site BB52, is that based off of all of the fingers and the actual Grand Canal, or was that like potentially running out of capacity? Was that doing both or just one or the other? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that they estimated they only had a 500,000.
Mhm.
That hasn't been actually surveyed, confirmed,
Mhm.
but that was their estimate. So we're going to be taking up about 140.
360. Okay. All right. And I missed it. You said earlier, what was the capacity of our project that was estimated, or no? Like the muck that we would be pulling out of Indian Harbor and Satellite combined?
Well, what I was thinking when I was that was that if you did the 360,000, that it was going to be about 28. I think that's kind of.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just wanted to clarify. Like I said,
That much.
Yeah.
Starts falling from the sky. Years ago.
no, yeah, 100%. There's a lot of variables, and I was just trying to piece all of it together.
Yeah.
Really, obviously, the goal would be, the whole project, but with the uncertainty coming at the state level, and then I agree, then you just throw everyday life and then a hurricane in the mix, then the city could be at a huge disadvantage. I do like the idea of doing phase one, phase two, and essentially why you have the infrastructure set up, it's a very good idea. And then potentially requesting more funding as the project continues.
You could always do like river modification mechanical dredging or something. Pipeline is not there. That's just, and those permits, by the way, with the Army Corps and FDP, 2031.
That was one of my other questions I was going to ask you.
I think one of them is February, one of them is March.
Yeah, that's about all I had right now.
Okay. Councilmember Romy.
Thank you for the presentation. It's a lot of information, but great job. Just a couple of questions. I got a little confused. I think you had said, I'm just curious, that the tax we were talking about was $4 on residents and $8 on non-residents. Is that right?
No, just the way that we're able to leverage the
Okay.
funding.
Got it.
So it's still half a cent per
Got it.
sales, but
Okay.
yeah, how we could leverage that funding through getting more grants,
Okay.
and the amount of grants that
It
we've been
sounded
able to
good the
get.
other way. I also wanted to ask the contract, if we were to sign it in 2026 and we're expecting it could go, we don't know when, until 2030, are those prices going to increase, or there's just depend, who knows what the economy's going to do?
He actually bumped them up a little bit so that they can account for starting in
Inflation. Okay.
2027. It would be between 2027 and 23.
Those
These are
prices.
just estimates.
Okay. Right.
But I think
Sure. Okay, I mean, I would agree with Adam and the mayor that to proceed with starting with the small finger canal seems like the best way we could go. It is a huge project and very necessary. It's just a lot of money, but maybe there's more grants out there that could help. So, thank you.
Councilmember Yorio.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very interesting. It certainly is a problem that has been accumulating for a long time in our area, and it has certainly led to a degradation of the quality of our environment. So I appreciate the focus that is being paid to this. A couple of questions I have. I took some notes. So one of the questions I have has to do with, I'm looking at this as an investment, and what would our return on this investment look like? So if we are dredging only certain areas of the canal, like the finger canals or the entire project, if other areas of the lagoon are also accumulating muck, what's the accumulation rate look like back into the areas that are recently dredged? Is there any research or data on after dredging what that accumulation of muck looks like?
We don't have data on the accumulation, but the biggest difference is that over the last 10 years, we've been implementing all these best practices to slow the accumulation of muck. So, for as much as is going into dredging, there's more going into stopping that input from accumulating.
the amount that's out there is like 7.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's before, we've had regulations, we've had changes in the wastewater treatment facility. A lot of changes have been made in the time being.
So there's been a lot of attention on reducing the nutrient load into the lagoon. There's still a significant load going into the lagoon, a lot of it having to do with fertilizer runoff and, stormwater or lack of stormwater treatment.
I will say, one thing that could, stand out, I think, in a grant perspective and securing funds is being able to confidently say, your community is doing their part to slow the accumulation of muck. Lawn care best lawn care practices. We offer so much valuable information on our Lagoon Loyal program to help slow the accumulation of muck. And so it helps, you want the funding to remove it, and this is what we're doing to also help slow down the accumulation. That's a helpful step.
Would a project like this typically have a follow-up monitoring effort to show or to measure, make the question that I asked earlier about what is the success of the project, meaning are we going to basically spend a lot of money removing muck and then the muck's just going to come back because other areas of the lagoon are going to be the source of that muck and the areas we dredge will then be the sink?
Yeah, so in order for us to get BMAP credits through the state, there's a very stringent monitoring protocol to follow, and so it starts 6 months after dredging. So we'll be starting that this year for the northern Grand Canal segment and working with Florida Tech to look at the fluxes and see what's been going on. Another way to measure improvement, which is huge, is dissolved oxygen. And so looking at the bottom water dissolved oxygen, and if there's an improvement in that, I mean, that's so beneficial to everything else in the system.
We've seen that.
Yeah, and we've seen that on our
Yeah,
site
it's certainly the root
project.
cause of a lot of those problems.
Yeah.
Um, capping. So sand capping of muck, is that something that has been examined or analyzed for this particular area?
It would not work in this area because no one would be able to get out. It would
Yeah,
be too shallow.
because the muck
Yeah,
is so
capping
deep.
is not traditionally practiced in canal systems, but we do have our first large-scale capping project that just got approved for the city of Cocoa Beach around the golf course. And then Florida Tech did research on a cap. It was an FPL project up in Titusville where they capped a muck pit, and they looked at it before it was capped, while it was capped, directly after it was capped, and then we had Florida Tech go back 5 years later and evaluate that cap, and it shows significant improvement. But it's just, yeah, the sediments, that area switched from being a source of nutrients to a sink for
Sure.
nutrients,
Yeah,
but
it's
it's just not feasible in a canal.
very
environment.
situational depending on the depth of the muck and the depth of the
Yeah.
water.
Where the muck capping works.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Would you mind speaking into the microphone? so
Where they
that
have
you
the
can think-
underwater burrow pits that they use to build the causeways.
Mhm.
You know, if you ever look at like a GIS mapper, you can actually see these dark squares. Sometimes they're shaped that way. That's where it works because there's still
There's still plenty of
compacts
volume of
it.
water above it.
Yeah,
I have one other question,
it's
and
deep.
it has to do with, you mentioned the possibility of getting additional funding after the project, so either state sources or other sources of funding. What, in your experience, what type, or what does that type of funding look like in terms of amounts of money and possibility of winning it, success rate of getting those types of grants?
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
They definitely, prefer construction ready, so it would help if you had already started the project. It has gotten competitive over the last couple of years, specifically because of that state mandate, the septic to sewer mandate. They tend to be throwing a lot of funding towards those types of projects. So the last couple of years, we were not successful in securing those grants, but a few years before that, it's just kind of the swing of the cycle. We had grants up to 10 million from the state. So, yeah. But yeah, state appropriations and then the state water quality grants are your best
Okay,
shot.
thank you very much.
Councilmember Nutt?
As the deputy mayor and the mayor have mentioned also that we're kind of in limbo right now. And with the projection of what kind of funding is going to be available to us because of the state's decision on property taxes. We've already, with the Florida League of Cities, they've already estimated what our shortfall is going to be, and that's going to be detrimental. So with that, I do have questions. I would love to see this done, and it's project's been well overdue and well needed. But what I would like to know is after the muck removal is done, what other, what can be done in order to prevent it from happening again because of the high traffic of the boats and everything else that's happening in there? And is aeration one of those things that can be done? I know that that's a study, that's something that FIT had done. And we have volunteers on these finger canals that are willing to allow the county, for them to use their electricity to power these aerators inside the canals in order to help keep the muck down. The other question I have is that the finger dredging, they're staying 10 feet away from the original banks in order to, their insurance, issues that they're going to have or liability issues near the docks. There's still a lot of muck in there in that 10-foot section that they have. So we're looking basically from the bottom of the dredge plate up through the slope and the existing ground. That's a lot of, what options do the residents have, or would they have, or are there options for them to, what they can do to eliminate that?
Okay, so the first dissolved oxygen question, there was very limited success in the research for the aeration in terms of getting muck out. I was part of that research at Florida Tech. So like I mentioned, the sediment oxygen demand, muck consumes oxygen so quickly that if you're supplying it, it is taking it. And that's pretty much what they found in that study is it was incredibly localized benefit, like right directly around that aerator was the only benefit that they were seeing because of the surrounding muck. So because it's due to that sediment oxygen demand, I would think that if you dredged it and then had aerators, that could be beneficial because you're not having that source consuming it. Also, just more education, neighbors talking to neighbors about lawn care practices. You know, it makes a big difference. It might not feel like a lot in an individual's impact, but when you have hundreds of houses along a canal and everybody's chiming in to make a small difference to help it, you will see an impact. So that's huge and long-lasting improvements. It's really just that education aspect. And our program, our outreach coordinator, Brandon, is great at giving those talks. I'm sure he would love to come. I'm volunteering him. I'm sure he would love to come talk to the community.
Well, my main concern is that we have residents that are on these finger canals that are either can't have a boat or they can't get their boat out or in night right now. So us being taking care of this, if we go through with the project, get the finger canals taken care of, but they're still stuck. So it's an existing problem. So I'd just like to know if there's any way we can explore
And then with
options.
the
I'm pretty sure the mayor knows more about
With
that.
the docks, at first there's a 10-foot offset from the
Right.
docks, but like what we did for the northern Grand Canal, the county's portion of the Grand Canal project, we had residents fill out waivers. We hand delivered waivers to every
That's what I needed
resident,
to know.
and if they
Seeing
sign the
educated
waiver,
residents on that
it
is
could
perfect.
get up as close as to 5 feet.
Generally can't get up any more than that.
Correct.
The pilings.
There might be new construction, it might be new construction, and they've actually considered, they don't go all the way down into the sediment, they're considering that muck part of the sediment, so that's what we were finding is that you really can't do any less than
Well,
5
if we
feet.
get to that point, we can start healing, so. it's good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and even when we did that at Grand Canal, up in the unincorporated area, the canal's greatly improved water quality, even if you're not getting all the way up to the seawalls.
And we do have pictures from residents that I am happy to share after this meeting of their dock. The muck came up to their dock, and even with the dredge able to get within 5 feet, I mean, the muck,
Sloughed
Yeah.
in.
It falls
it's
down.
sloofs. So, I mean, there was a drastic difference in their dock. They were quite pleased, and they were at the way back, which is even a little more difficult because you might have utility lines and stuff that you have to avoid, but it was night and day the difference.
Thank you.
You have seawalls too. I mean, you got a bunch of people on seawalls, and some are newer than others. Some have the vertical panels that were embedded deeper than others. I know we did a project. It was, I won't mention the name of it, but there was some boarding docks, boarding piers, and it turned out that after we did a muck survey of the area, they weren't even embedded into the actual soil. They were just in muck, just kind of sludgy stuff. And it's not the case anymore. They managed to fix that. One of the other things I want to mention was, and this is important, is so the money that is allocated from the soil funds right now is roughly about $20 million. That's locked in money? What I'm concerned about is come November, no telling whether that sales tax will survive the vote.
Oh, yeah, that's already been earmarked.
Okay, I want to make sure it's
Yeah,
earmarked for
that won't change.
however long.
Yeah.
Okay, make sure that's not at risk.
And, Indian Harbor Beach.
Okay, anybody else? No more questions? You guys are good. Very good presentation.
Thank you.
So right now I have one speaker card here. So if any of you all want to speak on this, you'll need to fill out one of these and hand it to our acting city clerk, so that we can get you officially on the record. So what we'll do is you guys can go ahead and sit down,
All right,
and then if
thank
there's
you.
questions for you, then we'll call you back up. with one card, and it is, and I am not going to get this name right. Robert Z. I'm going with Z. Can you pronounce your name for me? That's why I couldn't say it. It's not close, that's for sure.
Live on Eleuthera Lane.
Okay.
And I just brought some pictures to show you how
Yes, we are. Wow. Yeah, pass me.
At the eastern end.
Yeah, can you go ahead and go back to the microphone so we can get it on? We got to get on record. And you're on TV, so.
Oh, okay. 30 years ago, I guess, was the last time it was dredged in our area, and they didn't do our canal because they ran out of money. So, so I think we got a little bit more of a hardship than the most.
Right.
But anything you could do would be great to help all our neighbors over there.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, I'll take
Here's your picture. There you go. Those are beautiful. We get any other speaker cards? Did you fill out a? Okay, bring it on up to. Oh, I know that man.
And this is really more a question for natural resources team. I'm just curious about.
Yeah, please.
Sir, name and address.
Yeah, name and address.
My name is Bob Pickert. I live at 121 Windward Way here in Indian Harbor Beach. And I was curious about what's the differential between the cost for the muck removal versus the interstitial treatment? Was that broken out in those, in that information you provided? Is there a way to characterize the where that breaks down? And that was a 50-page document or whatever that was provided for this meeting. Okay, I'll take a further look. I must have missed it. And the other thing was the locations for the muck samples. There were 9 sediment samples that showed high arsenic, and I think one of them had a copper exceedance over residential exposure standards. And I didn't see that where the location of those samples were. It wasn't. I didn't see that it was shown on the table. Was there another place in that document where that shows the sample locations? On page 10 of the document that we're referring to, page 10, there's sediment 1 through 9 samples. And the table that's there shows that the arsenic level exceeds residential arsenic exposure levels for no further, exposure controls or something. On page 10, I didn't see where it noted where those samples were taken.
You were looking for a figure or diagram that would show the actual
map,
sampling location.
Something. Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, those were my 2 questions. Was the difference between the interstitial water treatment, because it does seem like that may be something that we could find more cost-effective ways to treat that, to treat the interstitial water, and that could save a lot of money if it was, say, I don't know, 25, 30, 40% of the cost. Thank you.
Thank you. So, for any more information that they may have, county may have, would it be possible for them, if they were to forward links to that kind of information to make it accessible, put it on a website, maybe? Okay. Heinen.
Good evening. Pete Heinen, 512 Andros Lane, Indian Harbor Beach. First question was, have you had this meeting with the Satellite Beach City yet, and what was the results of that meeting? Okay, that was just whether you face the same. I live in Harbor Isles. We have 4 canals by Telemar. I think you're living up at the one between Eleuthera and Bahama, the one that was just up here a minute ago. Yeah. And then I live on Porpoise, which is between Bahama and Andros, and then there's one between the yacht club and our neighborhood. 89, I moved here December of 89, but the summer of 89 we were looking for houses in the area. Decided we wanted to be south of Mathers Bridge because it might fail. Does fail. They were dredging all of our canals hydraulically. They were using oars and paddles at the time. They impounded it, pumped into there from all of our canals. So all of our canals were done in 89. In 2005, we started a dredging committee with Jim Henry. Dylan is no longer with us. A couple people no longer in the neighborhood, but we did a dredging committee. We did Porpoise, which is between Bahama and Andros. We used Cray Marine, which was the one that No Galley Yacht Club was using. To me, it wasn't the best method. They just floated on a in place. It was just hit or miss, and they said, oh, it'll all slough down into the middle, and we'll get it to all 5 feet. Well, at that same time, they raised South Patrick Drive, which comes down Bahama, goes into our drains. So the people at the east end of our canals, soon after dredging, in fact, there was muck up at the end of the canals, and people can no longer get their boats out. So we've been talking for years about baffle boxes and all this other stuff to keep the runoff from South Patrick coming into our neighborhood, and it still comes into our neighborhood. So until we figure out how us being below the rest of the town, then you got Big Muddy that comes into by Sammy Cacciatore's and that way, and until you people keep that from coming, you go up the dead end of that, there's no water there. So, and then stories. There's no water up there behind the law office, and I mean, you got enough trees growing over that and everything else. So we're fighting a losing battle for waterfront that we're paying dearly for.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have another one at a time coming to me.
How's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
I'm Chip Gruber. I live on 510 Bahama Drive, also over in Harbor Isles. To address David, your comment about the dredging not coming right up to the seawalls. I think if there was an opportunity to have this as a planned event, I've had mine dredged. I've had underneath my dock dredged because I can't get my boat out. Very inexpensive. And if it was planned, folks that took the initiative, it's not expensive at all, have it dredged out from underneath their dock, then when the project starts, that muck could be pulled out. I don't think there's any argument here that the canals need dredged, and it's long overdue. And I don't think there's any argument that the longer we wait, the cost is going to go up. There's a couple things that I wanted to ask these folks back here. You've done a lot of sampling, and what I heard, and maybe I misunderstood, is that there's a lot more analysis. No way to take the information that you have and statistically analyze. Okay, I misunderstood. Okay,
Because there isn't any.
And you said the permit for the Army Corps is good for 5 more years? I don't think there's any argument. I don't think you'd argue. It's very difficult to get a permit. It's it's impossible. And I deal with this in my professional life with the Army Corps of Engineers. So I would put forth to you folks, right, and it sounds like everybody here on the council, and I think most people here would be on board, is the phasing of the project starting with the fingers. That gentleman's comment about property value is wholly correct. Property value and resale value plays into the tax basis, right? And I don't think you guys are going to let us have free property if the dredge spoils build up to the point where we got more yard, right? You're going to want to tax us on more yard, right? So why don't you tax us on what we have, get the tax money for resale value where we have navigable waterway. We don't have it right now. Start as a phase one with the canals. And what I would like to see, and I don't know if you're going to do a follow-up meeting or not, but you may want to consider this for satellite. Phasing plan where you said it's easier to get funding after the project started and you're under construction. Phase one, what's that process map look like? And what are the long poles for phase one to start as soon as humanly possible? What are the long poles? And what resources do you need to take those blocks out? To get phase one started, get people to be able to enjoy their property, have navigable waterways, and while that phase one's taking place, you overlap phase two, and you do the same thing. What are the long poles? Who can we go to for the shortfalls of money? And have a plan together that says, hey, here's where we're going to have problems, here's where we're going to need resources. And I'm sure there's folks in this room that have ties not only to this city and Satellite Beach, but the state level that can help out. I have to know some of those people. It's what I do for them.
Thank you, sir.
So
Sorry.
I'd appreciate it if you guys would consider that.
Okay, you got it. Yeah, I think we all want to see this happen. We are definitely on board. We want to see this happen. Obviously, it's a money issue. It's funding, and that's what it really boils down to, and how to come up with a plan that we can move forward with and get started on this as quickly as possible. I personally am just 1 out of 5 votes. I don't want to lose that window of opportunity to be able to piggyback with the current contractor. It's going to cost us more money. It's just going to get farther and farther away if we try to do that as a total project. And if we can do it as a phased approach, obviously there's some things that have to happen on the county side of things and to wrap up some permitting related issues, but I think it's a solid path forward given the circumstances that we're in right now and the uncertainty of funding. We need to use this money. It's there. It's waiting to be used for this project. So I think we need to move forward in a similar fashion. I don't know. It sounded like council was all in agreement that a phased approach was something that we should probably push for. So that's it. That's all I have. Else?
I have a couple more comments too.
Sure.
So I just want to reiterate that, the goal is for the full funding of the project, and that's going to be our continued effort is to fight for the full funding of this project. The majority of those nutrients obviously come in through those finger canals, and then we've come a long way with the baffle boxes and the grass clippings and fertilizer inputs, and we continue to come further with education. And as time goes on, more and more research and data is coming out for alternate options. So that's our job to fight for you, and we're going to continue to fight for that full funding at the state and local and federal level. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. This isn't a take it or leave it. We're going to continue to fight for that. So.
Yep. Everybody good?
I got it. One of the things I want to make sure everybody's aware of is, just like the deputy mayor mentioned, that there are some state things that are happening with our property taxes that everybody's fully aware of. And that's going to cause us to have a shortfall. And that's what's kind of hesitating us on our decision-making of going full force with this. If that wasn't an issue, this would be pretty much a go-ahead, full speed ahead issue to take care of what we need to take care of with our lagoon and our residents here. And with that being said, I'm going to use a little bit of my soapbox here and ask that you please lobby your state legislators, because they're a big force in that factor. And I don't know where you stand when it comes to property taxes. That's fine with me, and I don't like. But at the same time, the way we use our property taxes here in this city is to the dime. We use it very well. the city manager does an excellent job managing the funds in order to provide the services that we do here in the city. And so when it comes to making sure that there's no changes and we're having to worry about how we're going to come up with money, right now we're just in a waiting game, and we're going to see some of the decisions that are going to come out of the state. So if you have those concerns that you share like I do, I highly suggest you contact your state legislators. Thank you.
I have two questions. So two speakers spoke this evening about paying or having their canal or their area around their dock dredged, and that it wasn't expensive. I believe you mentioned that. So, so you know where this question's going to go, right? If everybody wants to pay $400, they can get their canal dredged. I know that's probably not realistic, but the question really comes down to if there has been some effort made by homeowners that was described earlier in the presentations from the speakers here, that they funded the dredging of their own canal.
Harbor Isles, 5,000 each.
Okay, so that was a hybrid funding scenario in that case. But the funding came from homeowners and then the city, right? The other question I had to do with the $21 million that's been earmarked from FDEP and from Doral. If we were to, would that $21 million be available in its entirety, regardless of what level of dredging that we do? In other words, could we take that $21 million and get $21 million worth of dredging and then determine what the priority of that dredging would be? Thank you for clarifying that.
All right, did receive a late speaker card. You'd state your name and address.
Yeah, Steve Lauer, 464 Bimini Lane in Indian Harbor, Harbor Isles. Had a number of questions. I think many people have already brought up the things about property taxes, but not just property taxes, property values. I don't know how many homes there are on the canals. Let's just say there's 500, and they're all at least $1 million. You know, that's quite a bit of money. If it goes down 10%, that more than covers the cost of the differential between what we have and what they're asking for the full price. But that's neither here nor there. I think my question is twofold. One is the northern part of the canal was dredged. From where we are right now in the process to that being dredged, how far is that from where we are now to where it would be dredged? Northern Canal, when they were at our part right now, which was permitted and talking about funding, between that time and when it was actually dredged, what was that time roughly? 5 years, 2 years, 1 year? From where we are now, how long would it take based off what we've already done elsewhere?
You're saying moving forward with this project.
From where we are right now compared to where they were, how long is that going to take? To start in this year, okay. The other question is, I've heard you guys say you want to do it. I think that's great. We all want to do it. but I have not heard that, at least for the finger canals, which we do have more than enough money, right? 21 million versus, what was it, 14 million or 17 million or something like
That's
that?
pretty close.
That you, are we gonna vote on that? We can actually say that we're gonna do it? That was part of what you were asking, okay, so it's either, we have to get the 40 million or try to get some, ask for the option that gives us.
Right.
Okay, I guess I misunderstood, because she said, you have 21 million and the finger option was less than that, so we already have that covered. That sounded like we could just say, all right, let's do that.
It's very close. I mean,
But we don't have the 20, if the whole project isn't.
I guess maybe it's shaking my fist at the sky to say, where'd the other $500 million go from the referendum? Trying to figure that one out. I know it's not your guys' fault, but okay.
no, they
So
have,
it's all or nothing. It's 40 million, or
they-
we have to try to scrimp to get the.
in their defense, in this document here, they do list out the number of projects, different types of projects that they have done over the lifespan of the funding so far.
Totally agree, but I would have assumed that that was all included in the original $550 million estimate, but I probably assumed wrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. I think that's it. I would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Councilmember Nutt, second by Councilmember Romy. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. We are adjourned.